We're back. It's Senior Bowl, and their watch list has a lot of names on it. Two that I think you guys need to know about from a smaller school. I won't call it small, but smaller. And then who stands out? There's some edge rushers. There's a couple of guys whose names we really want to see this season, and you're going to want to see them too. This is what we're going on today on Locked On NFL Draft.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of the Locked On NFL Draft Show. I am your host, former NFL and AFL defensive back, Haener Crocker. And of course, as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ryan Tracy from Locked On Chiefs and Rogue Analytics. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day, and excited to continue to kind of follow up with some of the talk yesterday about the Senior Bowl list that came out and get into some good insight that I got and talk about a lot of these prospects. So, without further ado, let's talk about these Fresno State guys. Show a little bit of love to the Bulldogs out west, and they have 4 players on their Senior Bowl watch list, a little bit less than the 12 that Alabama has. But 2 of these guys in particular are players that y'all should know about, and one for sure, quarterback Jake Haener. All right, this is a guy who is not talked about in the realm of the top quarterbacks in the league, right? Like, who do people talk about? They talk about Bryce Young. They're going to talk about C.J. Stroud, right? And for good reason. Those guys are extremely talented. What about quarterback Van Dyke out of Miami? And you got, all these quarterbacks, Florida's quarterback. And you talk about everyone, but who's talking about Jake Haener, quarterback out of Fresno State? And he's not the biggest of guys. All right, and that's one thing right there that might be a knock on him immediately. But I made a phone call. Someone he works with quarterbacks, trains quarterbacks, and he's kind of been close to this situation out there at Fresno State. And he's had a chance to really watch this guy, see how he moves. And he has some hot takey kind of things to say about Jake Haener, to say the least, right, Ryan? So let's talk about him first, all right? And some of the notes I took down. First thing that jumped out to him was he's twitchy, all right? You want those guys that are twitchy, sudden, in the pocket, right? They know where to go with the ball. He's extremely heady when it comes to reading a defense and recognition. His recognition, he labeled it as an A+ when it came to Jake Haener's play recognition and what he's seeing from the defense. His arm talent is through the roof. And that's something that you probably don't expect for a quarterback that's not the biggest. And again, I think that's going to be his biggest knock, not the size, and he's not at Power 5, right? Because when you think of guys that are a little bit smaller, you do have, Bryce Young. And nobody's knocking Bryce Young.
Oh, right? Sure they are.
Or nobody's knocking Kyler Murray, who you see on the big stage at Oklahoma. But Jake Haener, who's around 6 foot tall and a little slender, has the elite arm strength, our arm talent through the roof. The size is the main thing that's going to hurt him. And this was the part where I thought was a little hot takey, but I'm here for it. Sure. He said he is the best quarterback at Fresno State since David Carr. Now,
Derek,
why
he's
is
pointing
that
at you.
hot takey? Because what about Derek Carr, right? Derek Carr, quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders now, and he's been the starting quarterback for several years. And one of his main takeaways was, well, look who Derek Carr was throwing the ball to at Fresno State. And not saying he wasn't going to be a good quarterback in the league without these guys, but he did have Devontae Adams. He did have Josh Harper, who broke a lot of Devontae Adams records. All right. He did have Isaiah Burst. He played in the NFL with the Chargers. All right. And he also had Jalen Saunders, he was drafted 4th round to the Jets. He played with the Jets. He played with the Saints. Right. So we're talking about 4 guys who played in the NFL, and Josh Harper, who was with the Raiders for a bit. So 4 guys, including Devontae Adams, that Carr played with. And those guys were big time. Well, Haener hasn't had that type of guy. Now, he does have a senior that we're going to talk about next. But in the sense of kind of what it looks like with his ability, it sounds like it's next level. But we don't hear a whole lot about it because it's out west. One other thing my guy said, he feels like if Haener was out of Power 5, he'd be a first-round pick. And the last thing he said was, reminds him a little of Sam Howell, but with much more arm talent. And maybe that's the reason why a guy like Sam Howell was able to slide in the draft the way he does, because he maybe doesn't have the big arm and, being able to make all the off-platform throws and things like that. A+ work ethic, A+ mechanics, a lot to really like about Jake Haener. So we said a mouthful there, but there's hype. There's hype surrounding him, and I won't be surprised if we hear a lot more about him heading into the season.
Yeah, I mean, twitchy, arm talent, work ethic. Those are three things that are going to help you make it in the league. So it makes a lot of sense. When you talk about coming from Fresno, it is about overcoming those weapons. And you've seen some guys try to run up some stats in smaller school situations. Do you think that his performance is ultimately, even without those prime time guys are going to make it in the league at the wideout positions, which I know we're going to talk about the wideout in the next segment. Is that enough for him, do you think? Can he get on the radar for everybody outside of the guys who know, the insiders that you have?
I think the biggest thing for them is protecting him and keeping him upright. Now, they do have one senior offensive lineman on the watch list.
Yep.
So they have him, Bull. But outside of him, I mean, they had a young offensive line that they're going to need to be able to protect him. And that's the bigger thing, especially when, in a few weeks, they got to play against USC. And not to say USC is going to be this big, dominant defensive line or anything like that, but can they protect their quarterback, Jake Haener, against SC in some of these bigger programs? Last year, they played against UCLA. They played against Oregon, right? Those are definitely bigger programs than what you're getting from Fresno State right now. So I think that's going to be a big thing right there, making sure that, you got to really protect this young quarterback. And if they can do that, maybe, just maybe, that can boost his draft stock. Enough of Jake Haener. All right, we're going to talk about a guy that he's actually going to be throwing the ball to, as well as a couple of defensive ends that maybe y'all should know about as well. But first, we want to talk to y'all about the good folks over at Dave. And level with me here. All right, we've all been in a situation at some point in our lives when we were in a little tight with cash. All right, need a little extra money, and maybe you can't, you couldn't afford to put a few gallons in your car. Maybe you want to take someone on a date and you want to give a gift, but you didn't have money for that. That's where Dave can really help you. If you are living paycheck to paycheck, or you struggle to make ends meet, it can be very stressful when unexpected expenses come up. Now, Dave can help you get out of that pinch when you really need it. And hindsight is 20/20, and you can't change the past. But if you could get a little help from your future self, maybe you'd ask to borrow a little cash. Now you can with Dave. Dave is a banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank. That's more money to be able to buy a wedding gift. That's more money to be able to catch up on some bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out with no hangups. There's no interest. There's no credit check needed at all. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief that they need with the extra cash. So if you are in a pinch and you need some help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from your future self. Download the Dave app right now in your app store. All right, and that is DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. All right, for terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fee apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member the FDIC. Your future you will thank you. All right, guys, we want to thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen of the day. And it's Fantasy Draft Week on the Locked On Podcast Network, so make sure that you go over to Locked On Fantasy Football for your second listen. They got a fantasy expert over there right now by the name of Vinny, and he's bringing you 20 years of NFL expertise and a unique angle to give you the moves no one else has. Get ready for your fantasy draft with the Locked On Fantasy Football. So there was one more guy that I want to talk about at Fresno State, and I'll kind of give him his flowers, then we can get into some of your edge rushers. But receiver, Jalen Cropper, all right, and got some good notes on him as well. And we talked about maybe not having the most prolific, dynamic weapons, right? When we say that, that's no disrespect to Fresno State, but let's say, you're probably comparing him to LSU and the prospects they've put out. We're talking about receivers that are going in the top 10, top 20, first round. Alabama, we just saw, John Mechie and Jameson Williams get drafted both off of tearing their ACL, and they still went high. All right. So not maybe playing with those type of prospects, but Jalen Cropper, good notes on him. Burner, has extreme straight line speed, probably going to run in the 4.3s on the laser. All right, he's a little slim, so that's one thing, again, almost like Jake Haener. And those are also things that maybe that's why they're at some smaller schools, right? Don't have like that elite size that maybe some of these Power Fives are looking at. He's listed at 6 foot, 180 pounds, and, to be potentially play at the next level, maybe, just maybe, because he is coming from a smaller school, has to add a little bit of weight to be more intriguing to some of these draft scouts. He worked a lot in the slot, and he was really good working over the middle, the intermediate area. He's really good in the quick game. The one thing that people are going to keep an eye on and to see if he improved is just the hands. How natural have they grown to be? There was a little bit of a hiccup there, but if he can improve on that, then we are talking about somebody who could potentially be a mid-round draft pick. So a guy that is really primed to be a Senior Bowl type guy, especially with him, his quarterback. Can they make it to the Senior Bowl? And if so, because we just talked about there are a ton of guys that the Senior Bowl are looking at. But if they can get there, we're talking about two guys that are extremely talented and potentially can help themselves get drafted. But talk to me a little bit about. Go ahead.
Well, and that stack, that's the key thing, right? If you can both make that, you can help yourselves out. You can take that small school start, and you can roll that into something that's actually an advantage when you get on that field in Mobile. I think that makes a big difference. We're going to talk edges. I'm going to bring up a couple of guys too that I'm interested in seeing at that wide receiver position as well, because I didn't see enough of Zay Flowers from Boston College. I want to get some of him. I think that there's a lot of potential there. I didn't see the route diversity that I wanted last season, and honestly, going back anything before that as well. So I do want to see that too. A.T. Perry's a guy at Wake Forest that I'm really interested in seeing. He made this list as well. His body control is something that I really enjoyed watching the first time. I think that there's more to his game that he can improve. I bet that he makes and gets the invite. That's just my gut feeling right now. We're going to have to see if that's the way that it ends up working out. Michael Wilson from Stanford, shout out to him. I'm looking forward to seeing him. And then Trey Tucker, can he do something at Cincinnati and make that program take another step forward, or at least stay in the conversation from all the success that they had last season and really roll that forward? I'm interested in that as well. So a couple other names at the wide receiver spot to watch. But in the end, hey, it's about throwing the ball and hunting the guy who throws the ball. So when we get back, we'll get into some of the edge rushers that I want to take a look at.
All right, but before we get into those edge rushers, we definitely want to talk to you a little bit about good folks over at betonline.net and how it is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for your odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and also golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, podcasts. They got you covered with all of that. All right, head over right now to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the actions that are happening at BetOnline, where the game starts. Let's talk about some of these edge rushers, and we'll definitely get into a few other prospects whose names are notable as well.
Yeah, we're going to have to. The first one off the top of my list is probably a no-brainer, because there's like 17,000 of guys from Georgia that are going to be on this watch list, right? But Nolan Smith, to me, is the big intrigue, because he lost a lot of his support. A lot of the guys that helped him get one up on some and get some free runs in other spots. Like, how can he adapt to he and Jalen Carter being really the faces of the Georgia front this year? That's what I need to see. I think he's got all the get-off that he needs. I think he's able to change his pad level with sufficient regularity that I think he can keep everybody off their toes. I want to see a little bit more functional strength. I want to see a little bit more usage of secondary hand techniques. That's one of the things that I'm looking for him. A lot to go into it, but he's a guy that is going to get mentioned prime time. He's going to get on national TV. So it's all about the fact that I think Carter's just slightly a better prospect overall because he can be so dominant. He's also a little bit younger. So let's see what they can do together. Can they play off of each other? I don't know how you feel about them, but in general, I think the Georgia pass rush is probably still in pretty good shape. I don't know who's going to take the lead on it, though.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia, they're always going to have some big-time bulldogs over there on the defensive line, and not just the D-line, really amongst that entire defense. You know, last year, how many guys got drafted in 2020 class? I mean, we're talking about
all of them.
It felt like the entire defense, huh? You had safeties go. You had linebackers go. You had edge rushers go. You had Jordan Davis go from the interior. I mean, just big-time talent there. Is there another edge rusher that kind of caught your eye as well when you looked at the list?
Yeah, there's a bunch. Like, the guy that I think has the biggest opportunity to get himself into the conversation is Zach Harrison from Ohio State. Had a lot of hype at one point. I felt he fell off last season pretty dramatically, and there were times where he just kind of disappeared. And Tyreek was there, and he got a lot of the attention, and I think he actually made more plays. But there's still a ton of potential there. I think folks that I've talked to have kind of soured on him a little bit because of a couple of ball games where he just kind of didn't make enough noise and almost fell into the background a little bit. I think this is an opportunity for him to get himself back up towards the top of the list. And this will do it. With Nagy and the staff at the Senior Bowl already announcing you, that automatically gives you a little bit of lift. And if he can respond, take his game up a little bit, I want to see a little bit more explosion. Again, I want to see what his plan is. Can he have a plan? That's one thing that I haven't seen much of on his film. Now, I didn't go back super far, but you'd hope that you're progressing through your career. I expect more from him, and I hope that I see it this season. Another guy that's on my list because I really like what he brings, but I don't think he's put it all together in one package. That's Brenton Cox Jr. from Florida. I'm looking forward to seeing him. Hopefully I'll get to see some of those East Coast games live this year. Don't always get that where I live. And I know, you're a little closer, but not a whole lot. So he's on my list. And this first week, it is O'Shawn Mathis. I'm looking forward to a Nebraska player. You don't hear a lot about Nebraska edges lately. And I think getting him on this list shows you that not only are they going to be on international TV playing in Dublin here this first weekend, but they're getting a lot more look. And I think he's a guy that is in prime position in that program. Frost has a lot on his plate, but this is a guy, Mathis, that I think you can kind of turn loose. And if you actually dedicate some time to scheming him up a little bit, I think that'll get his motor started. And I think he's going to be in a position to really surge through the season. And I think Nagy and his staff are going to like him a lot in the end.
Nagy and his staff, man, they've done an amazing job really just figuring out like who fits the Senior Bowl build, and those guys, they're all getting a lot of opportunities at the next level. A few other guys whose name really stand out to me. You got a couple of safeties here from the SEC, Jordan Battle out of Alabama. And how often is it that we see Alabama, prospects, especially in the secondary, guys that are going to really be drafted, stay for their senior year. All right. There was a guy a few years ago, you got Levi Wallace. He was a cornerback. He stayed for his senior year. I believe he was undrafted, but he's made his, some decent amount of money at the NFL level playing with the Buffalo Bills for multiple years. You also have a few other guys. Joe Fucha, the Arkansas transferred to LSU. He's a safety, kind of a hybrid guy, has that coverage ability, can play down. He's physical, but he also, as a safety can give you that coverage ability. You got Michael Penix, quarterback, He transferred from Indiana. They have this nice, big, tall, athletic quarterback now. So they're like, all right, Penix, you can get up out of here. All right, so he went to Washington. We're going to see how he does over there on the West Coast. A couple more quarterbacks that went from the West Coast and headed more east. JT Daniels, we talked about him on the previous episode, but a guy who transferred from USC to Georgia. Now he's transferring from Georgia to West Virginia. Keaton Slovis as well, transferred from USC. He's now at Pittsburgh, taking over for Kenny Pickett, who went to the NFL. Zach Charbonnet, another guy who's a transfer. Just think about all these guys right now, even just in this list that I'm listing off, that went from one school to another, hoping that they can find a better fit for them and their ability. One guy who I do have listed who did not transfer is Joseph Nada, Clemson receiver. And he's a guy who I got to watch in person when he was in high school over at Folsom. And I actually coached against his brother as well when I was at Edison. Big time game, a big time playoff game there. But, talented receiver. Has the size, has the ability, nice little polish to him, but he's staying for his senior year, and he's hoping that DJ Ukulele can really kind of turn that page and really help the young receiver out or the senior receiver out and potentially get him to the Senior Bowl. So a lot of prospects here where the names you see it and it's like, man, okay, I watched this guy here. How well can he do as a senior?
There's one guy that you left off for me, and I appreciate you doing that. Thank you very much, because I know you're big on him. I want to see this. He has the opportunity to be the last Pac-12 UCLA quarterback, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I'm interested to see what he can jump up to. Right, amidst all the transfer talk and all that stuff, he's still in this same program. I really think he can take a step forward and get on the map, and I'm really keen to see him. He might be the most intriguing West Coast quarterback this year. I don't know. Do you think there's somebody else that you're more interested to see? I mean, Caleb Williams, I guess.
I am glad that you brought him up because this is a guy who now gets to play with Chip Kelly one more year in this offense. Yep. And this offense is supposed to be quarterback friendly. I think for him, and we talked about Zach Charbonnet, but, you look at the list of seniors that are on the watch list from UCLA. No receiver. You got a running back, you got an offensive lineman in John Gaines, but no guy that he's able to get the ball to. So who's going to be catching passes for Dorian Thompson-Robinson? And this was a guy who was a big-time prospect coming out. He was a big-time dual threat type guy. Can he really take that next step from an efficiency standpoint? It's going to be tough a little bit when you don't have the guys. And I thought that was going to be the most interesting thing to see if he could overcome that when he chose to go to UCLA. It was a little bit of a surprise to me. So far, it's looking like, maybe he should have went somewhere else. I'm surprised he is a guy that didn't transfer for a senior to maybe put himself in a better position.
That's kind of where I was going too. Amongst all this action, he's wrote it out, and I think it's the Kelly thing. And let's see what they can do. I hope that it gets a little bit more, less system for him and more him for the system. You know what I mean? Make that fit a little bit closer.
Big time ability, dynamic type quarterback. Can't wait to watch all these guys and see who actually makes it to this Senior Bowl. But that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On NFL Draft. We definitely want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Now, go make the Locked On Fantasy Football your second listen. Find an intellectual fantasy expert with Vinny, who brings over 20 years of NFL expertise and unique angle to give you the moves no one else has. Get ready for your fantasy draft with Locked On Fantasy Football. But till then, go watch some college football this weekend. I'm excited about that. We'll talk to y'all Monday. Peace.